South Africa's finance minister, amidst a volatile global outlook, tabled a mid-term budget statement that has remained true to his tough love philosophy for state-owned entities. The Treasury listed several long-standing impediments that continue to hamper South Africa's economic growth, including unreliable electricity supply, an inefficient ports and rail network, weak state capacity, and high levels of market concentration, including crime and corruption issues. The finance minister projected that consolidated government spending will exceed 2.2 trillion rand this year and likely rise to 2.5 billion rand in the next financial year, while GDP prospects have declined from the 2.1% estimated in February to 1.9%. The National Treasury is making progress to stabilize the debt burden, with a fiscal deficit of 4.9% of the GDP projected for 2022-2023. There is some good news. Now, the country is expected to record a higher than expected revenue collection, mostly through corporate income tax, that will assist to improve the economy. Joining me now from Johannesburg, South Africa, is economist Russel Rensburg, and he's going to take apart this budget for us. Russell, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, good afternoon.
All right, and it's morning here, but we'll take the welcome greeting as it is. So let's look at this budget that was presented by the minister, and it looks to sort of reframe the country's economic outlook. And it's very different from the speech he gave in February. And that's because, of course, we're living in a completely different world at this point in time, just a few short months down the line. What do you think has changed so much from the February speech to what we have now seen presented for the medium-term budget?
I think the whole goal of this medium-term budget is to update the outlook, right? And to see, and I think everybody knows that the global environment now, after the recent spring fall meetings of the World Bank and the IMF, is looking increasingly volatile and uncertain, and places significant risk to many of our emerging economies. You know, the cost in global interest rates are rising, inflation is rising, growth is slowing, and unemployment is increasing. You know, so I think the challenges ahead are very significant, and South Africa is very reliant on external portfolio influence to balance its budget, needs to consider all of these things. And I think that's in part why the minister sort of doubled down on this need to deliver a primary surplus and improve the country's overall fiscal position. But it doesn't come without risks.
It doesn't come without risk. So let's talk about what South Africa, like many African economies, has battled. We've seen the strengthening dollar, which has really attacked the strength of many of our local currencies, rapid interest rate hikes, rising consumer inflation. The cost of living has also gone up across the continent and the world. But South Africa has been in a position to benefit from the commodities boom we've seen in the past several months. And some have said that this is one of the things that's being fed back into the budget to finance this budget. So what do you think is helping South Africa finance this budget? The deficit is not as large as some of the deficits we've seen with recent budget presentations across the continent.
Look, I think we missed out on a big part of the commodity boom, partly because of the weakness of our infrastructure and our ports, where we could probably have to export a lot more commodities than what we did. You know, so the support to translate in that sense is understandable, because we are facing significant constraints in our ability to export and take advantage of this economic or this commodities boom, as people refer to. But I think more broadly, the big issue is that South Africa is also a constitutional democracy, and the constitution is the highest order of the land. You know, and in this budget, there's very little attention paid to the claims of people's human rights, especially in the right to access healthcare services, which would be impacted by this budget. The right to access social assistance, where the minister essentially poured cold water on expanding the social assistance net, and more broadly into like downstream investments in education, which are also sort of curtailed. So on the one side, we're doing well in balancing the budget for capital, but from a human rights perspective, I think we stand the risk of regressing on many of our constitutional obligations.
Okay, so
and then, of course, there's the elephant in the room.
Okay. Your mention of Transnet takes me to what basically amounts to a number of budgetary bailouts for state-owned companies. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen that the finance minister's stance is to give some tough love to state-owned companies in South Africa. With Transnet, the Treasury has allocated 5.8 billion rand for Transnet's debt, half of which is shifted funds to repair infrastructure that was damaged by the recent floods, and also half to increase locomotive capacity. Do you think this is the real lifeline that Transnet needs right now? How far will this kind of impact and this intervention, as it is, go for Transnet?
Well, only time will tell. I think one of the challenges with the parastatal is that it doesn't have the strong corporate culture needed to sometimes draw the right kind of leadership and make the right kind of strategic decisions without the constraints of the public fiscus. So I think in part this will maybe help solve some of the metrics, but in terms of operation, enough. State workers literally shut down the ports and are ultimately able to achieve a way above inflation wage settlement. So I think there is a challenge with Transnet, and it needs to probably be fixed to be able to run more efficiently. And I think that comes with improving the governance. So in the short term, this bailout may help. But I think a lot of other analysts have also worried that this could be the first of many bailouts. And in the current framework, I don't think we can afford that, because it does come at the cost of expansion of public provision of services to the people that need it.
And when we look at Transnet, there's no way we can't have this conversation and also look at Eskom. And now it's gotten to the point where government is saying they're going to take on up to two-thirds possibly of Eskom's multi-billion-dollar debt. So we know that could be anywhere from around 130 to about 260 billion rand. But this is meant to also be complemented by other reforms which would help the state-owned electricity providers' financial sustainability into the future. So options for Eskom's debt have been limited, and they have tried a number of things under different management teams, but nothing seems to have really stuck. Do you think bringing this debt onto the Treasury is the best option? You mentioned, of course, the fact when you're bailing out state-owned companies like this, it's taking money away from social services potentially for the people who really need it. So is this the right way that we can handle this Eskom situation for South Africa?
Look, I don't think there's any other way. You know, the economy doesn't grow without consistent energy supply, right? Obviously, there are a lot of execution risks attached to it. We're still not quite sure how the overall restructuring of Eskom is working and whether that will play out to a more efficient, regulated energy provider and more stability. We don't know how long it will take for this additional capacity that they're bringing in. So most of us are thinking over the next 2 years, we're still not necessarily going to have consistent supply. But again, the risks to the budget are high. You know, they're talking about having this debt being added to the debt stock. So in the short term, we'll probably have a further increase in debt servicing costs, which is the fastest growing cost in the budget. And again, putting pressure on the state's overall capacity to improve public services and even state capacity in the administration. And I think we're going to have to think carefully about how we manage these things going forward. What is also unclear is if we will continue to guarantee Eskom's debt, in addition to taking this onto the main balance sheet. But we don't have many options in terms of Eskom and, you know, to fix everything. Even our internet connection with the current bits of load shedding is impacted. So, yeah, I think it's something that they can't afford not to do. But in this particular statement, they didn't give us clear guidance in terms of how it will be done.
And that should be expected to come in the following weeks. Earlier, we did tell you, of course, that the minister announced they would be looking at an independent advisor who will take the country through, or rather the Treasury through, how to deal with Eskom's debt. So beyond that, you've mentioned the relief, or rather the social grants that have been coming, as well as going to the poorest. So we know that now we've decided in Treasury terms, that is, that the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grants would be extended until March 31st, 2024. It was introduced to be a temporary measure, has been extended several times in the past few years. But what pressure do you think that puts right now on the Treasury? You're taking on bailouts for at least 3 state-owned entities. You're also going to continue these grants as well. Have they even had the intended impact for you to say that there's a justification, a case for it to be continued for South Africans?
I think it's the 40 billion rand question. But for me, I mean, as a health activist and advocate for addressing poverty and inequality, I don't think we have a choice not to extend this grant. In fact, we need to increase it, especially in light of, as you mentioned earlier, the rising cost of of living. Food prices have gone up significantly. Fuel prices have gone up. 60% of the country is essentially structurally unemployed and have no sources of income. And who knows, the distribution we're still not clear about the geographic distribution of the grant and how many people have taken it up. But I think Treasury have really tried hard to make it administratively impossible for people to actually access this grant. So as it stands, the current budget for the grant was underspent in the first 6 months. And part of that is because of the strict conditions that they apply to the people that need it. I've also read in the business press that the grant is actually supporting consumption in areas that are struggling as a result of the broader economic slowdowns, because it's bringing more people into the market. So I don't think the grant should just be seen as some kind of leakage or consumption expenditure by government, but also some kind of social stimulus, because it's spread out throughout the country. That money, almost 100% of it goes back into the economy. And hopefully in the months ahead, we'll be able to see a much clearer impact, especially in rural towns, what this grant has done to consumption and rural economies. So I don't think it's all bad, and I think it's something that we need to do. And it's not money we're throwing in the water, it's rather investment in a kind of social solidarity. And we should really look at raising it to the food poverty line, which is around 600 Rand per month.
Okay, so if you talk about social stimulus, we have to talk about the wage increase. Now, government has said they are done at 3% as an increase. They made their final offer on August the 30th, 2022. Unions were demanding 10%, of course, saying that that would be right above the bank's inflation, the consumer price index as it is. So where does this leave the unions when we're hearing government is saying we're stuck at 3%, there's no room for give? We've seen the number of strikes that South Africa's economy has suffered from in the recent few months. Where does this leave the unions in terms of collective bargaining or even moving the process around these wage increases forward?
Yeah. Like I think I'm the worst person to ask around this. The 3% wage increase that government is sort of committing to it, I think it translates to around 4.5%, but it's retroactive to April 2022. There's nothing in the current budget or in the forecast suggesting where they will settle at going forward. Where we are, with an ANC elected conference coming up in December, so many of the questions here are political, and where the country is at the moment. Personally, I feel we need to sit around the table and find some kind of solutions that take everybody's interest into play, and find a solution that's best for the country and not just for the unions or the politicians. But we are headed for a period of great uncertainty. I urge the government and the trade unions to think about broader social solidarity. 60% of our people are structurally unemployed and are completely reliant on grants. New job opportunities or economic growth in the past haven't been able to reach these people. And I think an increase in the public sector wage bill, just without taking a political position, will have an impact on government's ability to address the needs of the poor. So I think that they need to find a balance, and we have to look at how we could actually encourage more employment. At the moment, I think the state may probably be in the best position to create those kind of social jobs that can improve the amount of people active in the economy. But the unions, and it's going to be a tough negotiation here. The government's put its cards on the table. And I'm waiting to see how unions respond to the unilateral
All right, so Russell, let's also look at something that seems like it was omitted. So with the finance minister's speech, we've heard in recent times that South Africa has the potential to be grey listed by the Financial Action Task Force. It's a possibility, not necessarily something that would be probable to happen. But many have been concerned about the fact that there was at least some kind of omission of any concrete work towards how the Treasury was going to ensure that South Africa is not grey listed. Now, the minister did mention at least 2 bills that were tabled to work towards reforms. What do you think about this? Does he need to do any further highlighting or any further convincing around this? Or are the bills that are in front of the Parliament enough to sort of handle the situation South Africa finds itself with the with the Financial Action Task Force?
I think we need to find a way of addressing illicit financial flows, right? Not just in terms of the losses to the fiscus, but also to the broader risks around what can happen as a result of grey listing. I think the bills and stuff are a first step. And in some ways, we then come with the regulatory compliance, but we also have to implement it. I think the execution that is there are the things that people are going to be watching. This is not really an area of specialization for me, other than the fact that it's lost revenue. And lost revenue means less money for social services, which is my interest. But I don't think I won't be able to venture an opinion on whether what we've done is. But I do think that we need to be more serious and do more to ensure that we don't get the cost of that is significant.
All right, Russell, before I let you go, the minister says he's optimistic about the ability of his fiscal strategies to reduce risk to the economy and public finances over the midterm as well. Do you share his optimism? Do you think that this is a budget that has the potential to help South Africa mitigate and get through the shocks we're seeing for slower global growth and even this bearish financial environments that we're all having to live through?
No.
Short answer. So honestly, now expand the answer to why.
Doing some of the things, but not all of the things.
Repeat that again.
Look, at the end of the day, you have to look at South Africa's history, of poverty and inequality and redress, right? I think the poor are being asked to pay for the largesse of the rich. The poor are asking to be paid, asking to wait, and suffer while we address the structural issues. We are going into an election in 2024, so I think while on the one side, normal textbook solutions to economic crisis, we are doing the right things, but we're not doing enough to sort of avoid the upside risks when these things are playing out. And I think we needed to be a little bit stronger in how we will strengthen governance, particularly at all levels, not just at state-owned enterprises, but also the governance process. I mean, that relationship between the state and the party, how do we depoliticize that? How do we go through a process of sort of being honest with the population and giving a clear sense of where we are and really start looking at how we reform public provision, right? Because I think there's a lot of leakages there and we need to address it. And unless we do that simultaneously or let our financial reforms in some ways are influenced by our obligations to meet the needs of the 60% of the population and to create an environment of inclusive growth, we need a little bit more honesty and we need to strengthen our governance and participatory processes. The measures on their own won't necessarily protect us because there are many other risks that are not being managed by making these. In fact, we create other risks.
All right, we'll leave the conversation at that, Russell. There's a lot more. We, of course, did not get fully into the spending for education as well as health and security. But with the conversations around the budgetary bailouts, or some are saying allocations, as well as the extension of the grant, there's a lot of conversation to be had about what the Treasury has presented. Russel Rensburg, thank you so much for joining me. And it's at the end that the connection is gone. But a very big thank you to my guest for South Africa joining me, looking at the medium-term budget that was presented by the finance minister and what the highlights were. Winners were, of course, some of the large publicly owned or government-owned entities in South Africa. Winners also being South Africans who are using the distress grant that started around the time of COVID-19 has now been extended again until March 31st, 2024.